Hi, and welcome to Tea Leaves Programming. Today I'm going to talk about change, artificial intelligence, and what it means to be a person in this moment. So, I'm a child of technological change, of rapid technological change. When I was born, when I was in school, we still went to the library and looked up books by opening drawers full of index cards. That's how you found the book you needed. By the time I went to college, computer card catalogs were coming into vogue. And of course, today, those things don't exist anymore. The pinnacle of education, of being an educated, cultured family when I was a kid was you had a shelf of encyclopedias, right? An entire shelf, bigger than your arm span, and it had articles on everything. And now anyone with internet access has hundreds of times, thousands of times, maybe millions of times more information at their fingertips than I did in 1974. People knew that things were changing rapidly, and they knew that the change was accelerating, that the rate of change was accelerating. There was a very famous book called Future Shock by Alvin Toffler about the accelerating rate of change. And Future Shock had a very interesting perspective. It wasn't actually about the technology, it was about the technology's effect on people. Boiling it down, the thesis of Future Shock was that the increasing rate of change was overwhelming people, leaving them suffering from shattering stress and disorientation. If you've ever heard the phrase information overload, that was from Alvin Toffler. There were also TV shows. James Burke had a very famous show called Connections, where he kind of walked through how inventions influenced each other. And that spun off into a second series and book called The Day the Universe Changed. This was about a number of different technologies, the printing press, various mathematical discoveries. But the key to The Day the Universe Changed was not the practical effects of the technology on day-to-day life, but that these technologies changed how we perceive the world.
So, thanks to printing, we have a world where fact doesn't mean the same thing it did before. Not definitive, checkable through your own experience, but fluid, one stage removed, transient. And if that is true of facts, what happens to standards, values, ethics, when the facts they're based on aren't? What can you trust in a world where nothing in the old sense is real? Nothing.
Roll credits and mix.
1 minute.
So machine learning, artificial intelligence, AI, whatever you want to call it, has been on a bit of a bender lately. Lots of us have been applying it or using it or exploring it. I've dabbled a little bit with AI for the past year. For example, at some point I started hating the thumbnails I was using for this video series, for this channel, and I've gone to using AI to make simple kind of pixel art thumbnails. I kind of dig it. But I've never really used it super seriously for content, for the main content of the channel. And there's a few reasons for that. Largely, this channel is an aesthetic exercise. I do this because I want to be doing this. I've said this before, I'm not really doing this for you. If you didn't exist, if you weren't watching, I would still know that I made a thing and I wanted to make a thing. That's why I'm doing it. I want to make a thing. It's for my own pleasure. Now, it is nice when something I make can help people. And I've done a few different types of shows. Some of them are just about games. Many of them are computer related. And one that has helped a lot of people is my series on NAND to Tetris. Now, the first part of NAND to Tetris, which is a class where you start with a NAND gate and go all the way up to building a computer, an assembler, a VM translator, a compiler, an operating system that runs on that computer, and eventually the game Tetris. One of the nice things about the first part of that class is there's a way to do it that's very visual. And so when building the circuitry for the computer, I was able to use a program called Digital by a man named Helmut Niemann to kind of draw the circuits out in addition to the programming part of the course. And that made the videos very interesting. The videos need to be interesting from my perspective. I need to want to watch them or they're not any good. So then we got to the assembler, which is translating code from assembly language into machine language. And I did a couple of videos where I kind of did a presentation describing what the assembler would look like in conceptual terms. Those are pretty good. I still like them. Let me put a link to one of them up here. And then I said, well, I'm going to go on and I'm going to do a lab video where I actually live code the assembler. And I decided to do it in the Haskell programming language. And I was midway through recording it, and I just stopped. I realized that watching me code that particular task in Haskell was super boring. This was about, I think, 2 years ago that I gave that series up. And the reason it's boring is that assemblers are a very specific technology, and they have what I consider an interesting part and a boring part. The interesting part is once you actually have this kind of syntax tree in memory, doing this correspondence from the assembly language into the machine language. But in order to get that syntax tree in memory, you have to parse the assembly language, which means you have to use a parser library or write your own parser if you're really bloody minded about it. Either way, both of these tasks, it's like watching grass grow. So at the time when I abandoned this, as I said, that was about 2 years ago, I had the brilliant idea. I said, maybe this is a problem that AI can solve for me. And I went to, I think at the time it was ChatGPT, and I gave it my code. I gave it a description of what I wanted. I gave it the interface, gave it a simplified description of the syntax, and said, can you write a parser using megaparsec or attoparsec or whichever one of the Haskell parser combinator libraries you want to use. And it completely failed. The code it gave me was garbage, wasn't even close to being correct. Just from visual inspection, I could see it was wrong. It certainly didn't compile. So I gave up. I said, the choice is either I do it myself or I don't do it. And I don't feel like writing this parser, so I'm not going to do it. Now it's 2 years later, and I tried it again. I never thought the leopards would eat my face. I did basically the same exercise that I did 2 years ago using the newer OpenAI models and using the simplified syntax. It gave me some code. It got it right on the first try. Literally, I was able to copy and paste it into a file called parser.hs, compile, and the code worked on the first try. And I sat back and I said, So I don't have a strong conclusion or strong feeling that this is good or bad. It feels to me emotionally like it's bad. Intellectually, I know it's good in at least a short-term sense, right? people have been writing parsers for decades. People have been trying to find ways to not write parsers for decades. If you are of a certain age, you've probably used Lex and Yak, or Flex and Bison, which are essentially lexer and parser generators, right? Their purpose in life is to make it so that you don't have to write the parser yourself. So intellectually, I know writing a parser is of practically zero value to anyone out there who's trying to learn. It's certainly of practically zero value to me. I've written this exact parser in 3 or 4 different languages, for fun. This is exactly what one would want AI to do, which is do the boring part for me and let me think of the interesting part and let me work on the interesting part. At the same time, I was shook. And I think I'm not really shook that it got the right answer, but more of the gap between what it did a short time ago and what it did today. The rate of change of the improvement of the technology, it's kind of intimidating. Maybe that's the right word. I was going to say frightening, but I think intimidating is the better choice. So what does this mean for me as a programmer? What does it mean for you? Perhaps you're a software developer, perhaps you're an end user. What does it mean? I think there's a real question here. How do we live in a world where we always have the option to not do the work? Maybe this is no different than every other technological leap in history, right? Sometime back when was the printing press made? For the 1400s? Yeah, 1440. Sometime in the 1440s, surely there's a scribe or a monk saying that, what value is it to be able to write things if you're not doing the work of actually learning how to produce the letters yourself by hand? And look at how ugly these things are compared to these wonderful illuminated manuscripts. And you're commoditizing knowledge. Knowledge should be, this gets back to the James Burke, how people perceived reality. Knowledge is about glorifying God, and you're turning it into a commodity. All of these same arguments and discussions that we're having today, perhaps in slightly different contexts, were probably going on at that point. The production line for automobiles, you could find people even today who will tell you with a straight face that the value of an Hermes wallet is because someone is sewing it by hand versus using a sewing machine. I don't know. I don't feel that suffering is noble, but I do feel that there is value in educating yourself. I have no particular desire to ever learn calligraphy. It's not something I want to do, but I don't mock people who find aesthetic or meaning in doing it themselves. So if we have, we're already at a place where we all have magic boxes in our pockets that have 24/7 access to all of the information in the world, more or less. And now, or soon, we will all have that plus access to a brain to process that information for us so that we don't have to do it ourselves. I don't know. I feel like there's a good path here and there's a bad path here. So The bad path, I feel like, is easy to access. The bad path is easy to find people talking about, oh, the AIs are going to think for you, and you're never going to learn how to do anything. You're never going to let's take programming, computer programming as an example. You're never going to learn how to write your own programs. You're just going to vibe code everything, and you'll never learn what a variable is, what a loop is. You'll never learn parallel programming. You'll never learn what threads are. Whatever it is. Right? That's the bad path. And I mean, I guess that's possible. And I think that some people will fall into that. There's always people who want to use shortcuts even when they don't help. There is a good path though, right? The printing press did not destroy knowledge. The printing press did not destroy literature. It democratized it. It made it more available to people, and it allowed us to move up levels in abstraction. And that's what the Goldilocks case for AI, again, I'm going to use software development as an example, for us as software developers, is not that it prevents us from doing programming, but rather that it frees us to move our problems and move our solutions up to a higher level of abstraction. What does that look like in day-to-day work? I think we're going to find out. I hope we're going to find out. You've been watching Tea Leaves Programming. We've been programming like it's 2179. Thanks for watching.